Hi guys, and welcome to our next lesson. So in today's lesson, we are going to be taking a look at two very different movements, progressive movements during the American Industrial Revolution. And those are social Darwinism and social gospel movement. And today, for your bell ringer, your warm-up activity, before we get started, I really want you to think about and answer this question. So it says, during the Industrial Revolution, many people had ideas on how to improve society. So whose job do you think it is to help the poor and fix the problems in society? Do you think it's the government, the churches, people themselves, right? Uh, and when you answer this question, make sure you explain your answer, explain your reasoning. So make sure you answer this question before you continue on with the rest of this lesson. So the objective for this lesson, we are going to be able to analyze the similarities and differences between the ideologies of social Darwinism and social gospel. So you're going to be comparing and contrasting these two. So you're going to be doing this by completing a graphic organizer that I have created and posted for you. And you're going to be completing a reflective journal at the very end of the lesson. So some of the key vocabulary that you need to know before continuing on. There's three terms: ideology, social reform, and natural selection. And ideology basically means an organized collection of ideas or beliefs. So an ideology, for example, there could be a political ideology, right? So you have liberal and conservative, right? And basically that just means that there's a collection of liberal ideas about how government should be structured and what the role of government should be. And then there's a conservative ideology on government, the structure of government, and how what its role should be. And typically, for example, for conservatism, they believe in limited government involvement in the economy, right? So that collection of beliefs that there is, that's called an ideology, a collection of ideas. And then you have social reform. Social means related to society, right? And reform means change, to change, or a change. So therefore, social reform means changes in society. And we tend to think of these changes as positive, something for the better. So social reform means changes in society for the better. And then you have natural selection. Natural selection basically is the process that living things survive due to their favorable traits, due to characteristics that are favorable. And typically, we think of natural selection when we are studying biology or the sciences, right? And today we're going to see how that translates into history. So as we go, make sure to take notes on this graphic organizer, right? So you can see there's two columns. You have social Darwinism and social gospel. So on the left, under social Darwinism, you are going to tell me the definition of that term. Where was it used, this social Darwinism? What did people who believed in social Darwinism want? Who were the important people in this movement? What is your opinion of this ideology? I want to know your personal opinion after everything we've learned. And I want you to list 3 words to describe this ideology and write a sentence using this word, using social Darwinism. And for all of those questions, you're going to do the same thing for social gospel on the right-hand column. So just make sure that you're taking notes and using this graphic organizer as you go through the lesson. So, social Darwinism, what is it, right? So the definition is it's an application of the theory of natural selection to social, political, and economic issues. Basically, quote unquote, the strong survive, right? And this social Darwinism was used significantly to encourage human competition, right? And it was the idea that humans compete for the struggle of existence. So Charles Darwin, who was an English naturalist and geologist, he contributed much of his research to the theory of natural selection, which you should have learned about in biology. But if not, basically, this theory is also known as the theory of the survival of the fittest. And many social Darwinists saw competition amongst different individuals, amongst people and groups, as an ordinary aspect of human evolution. And the main idea of social Darwinism is that the status and privileges that are enjoyed by the wealthy and powerful members of society, they're the result of their personal characteristics and their characteristics and their traits that have evolved through natural selection. So, therefore, according to the social Darwinists, those who do not possess these traits were found to be powerless and poor members of society. So whoever was powerless and poor typically did not have the characteristics, the personal characteristics and traits that evolved through natural selection, right? And it was widely believed that it would be best for the powerless and poor members of society, it would be best for the human race to let those individuals and groups struggle for survival and later ultimately fall out of existence. So, where was it used? So, this theory was used to oppose intervention in the natural human order, right? It was used politically to advocate for laissez-faire capitalism, political conservatism, imperialism, and racism. And really, it was used to discourage reform and intervention in the economy. So it was the belief that the small percentage of wealthy at the top, with a more evolved class of people, that was significantly advocated by people like Herbert Spencer and William Graham Sumner and Andrew Carnegie. And they argued that social programs, government programs designed to aid poor people, actually worked against nature. So they really opposed government intervention in the economy. And that's why you can see here that they supported laissez-faire capitalism, which, like we've learned before, it's hands-off. It means the government does not intervene, does not interfere in the economy, and just lets things go. And in this case, evolve according to the quote-unquote natural order. So it was also used during the age of new imperialism to exploit people known of quote-unquote lesser breeds without the law. By superior races. So Nazism and fascism actually used social Darwinism to justify extreme nationalism. So, for example, key proponents of social Darwinism within Nazi Germany, they used these ideas to advance euthanasia in Germany, especially like the T4 program, which led to the murder of mentally ill and disabled people in Germany, in Nazi Germany, because they felt like they were lesser, right? According to this social Darwinist theory, they were lesser, and that they were actually a drag on the human race. That it would be best for the human race to let them die. And again, social Darwinism focuses on competition, right? So when you think about Darwinism, it's about letting everything evolve as it's going to, right? Whether that's the economy or human nature, human interaction, and even in war, right? So social Darwinism was against government regulation and was against government interference that might affect how the economy would evolve. So the whole idea was let things go, and just like evolution, it would produce natural selection, and the fittest, quote unquote fittest, would survive and the world would be better off. According to them, the species would advance through this process. So they believed regulation kind of gets in the way of the natural order of things. And this also plays into, again, the nationalist movements, this emphasis on competition and the survival of the fittest. For you and for your nation to survive, according to them, you needed to be the strongest, and you needed to be the baddest, and you needed to win in this evolutionary struggle. So it therefore also helped to lead to some of the the deadliest wars in human history, including wars like World War I, for example. Now we have the social gospel movement. The social gospel movement was a social movement within Protestantism, Christianity, and it applied Christian ethics to try to solve social problems, especially issues of like social justice, such as economic inequality, poverty, alcoholism, crime, racial tensions. There were a lot of slums during the Industrial Revolution, unclean environments, child labor. They also addressed the issue of like lack of unionization, poor schools, and they also opposed war, the dangers of war, right? And so in the late 19th century, many Protestants were disgusted by the poverty level and the low quality of living in many of America's cities, in the slums, right? So the social gospel movement provided a religious rationale for action, right? So they used religion to try to justify why something needed to be done to address these concerns. So activists in the social gospel movement, they hoped that through public health measures, right? So government reform, social reform, as well as schooling, they believed that the poor could develop talents and skills and that the quality of their lives would begin to improve. So where was it used? It was used in the United States prior to World War One. In the U.S. prior to World War One, the social gospel movement was the religious wing of the progressive movement, and its aim was to combat, like I said, injustice, suffering, and poverty in society. Right. So, like I said, some important concerns of the social gospel movement were labor reforms, such as abolishing child labor and regulating the hours of work, right? By 1920, they were actually crusading against the 12-hour day for workers at, like, for example, at U.S. Steel, which was that monopoly that we learned about. And so this movement was most prominent really in the early 20th century. So I'm talking early 1900s, before World War One. And it really was prominent in the United States, but also Canada as well. And so what did they believe? Like, what did they want as their end goal? And so the Presbyterians described its goals in 1910 by proclaiming the great ends of the church, so the goal, are the proclamation of the gospel for the salvation of humankind. So they wanted to save humanity. They wanted to shelter, nurture, and offer spiritual fellowship of the children of God. The maintenance of divine worship, the preservation of truth, the promotion of social righteousness, and the exhibition of the kingdom of heaven to the world. So basically, they're preaching salvation through service to the poor. They're saying that in order to be saved, in order as a Christian to be saved, you needed to serve the poor. And in the late 1800s, as a result, many reformers responded to this call to help the urban poor. And they began establishing things like settlement houses, which we kind of talked about a little bit so far. And these were community centers in slum neighborhoods, like in Chicago. And they provided assistance to the people in the area, especially for immigrants, if you remember our lesson on immigration, right, to the United States during this period. So we're going to do a little bit of an activity here. So it's social Darwin or social gospel. We're going to read through a brief autobiography about a specific historical figure. And we're going to do a few of these. So as you listen to this, as you read through the autobiography with me, I want you to try to figure out if they believe in the ideology of social gospel or social Darwinism. So make sure you're really paying attention, close attention, because you're going to be asked after we read it to identify which side they were on. So the first person's William Graham Sumner. And it says, I am William Graham Sumner. I'm a professor at Yale University where I teach sociology. I have studied Charles Darwin's The Origin of Species, that reveals the ability of animals to survive through adaptation, or otherwise known as survival of the fittest. I believe this theory also applies to human society. Millionaires are a product of natural selection. It takes a special talent, ambition, and character to be a Carnegie or a Rockefeller. So what do you think? Do you think he is a social gospel figure or a social Darwinist? So think about it and then answer that. Okay, so he was a social Darwinist, William Graham Sumner. He was a political science professor, like it said, at Yale University. He promoted the idea and the theory that success and failure in business were governed by natural law, by natural selection. And he also argued that no one had a right to intervene in the marketplace. The government didn't have this right. Therefore, he used social Darwinism as a way to justify the doctrine of laissez-faire capitalism, right? So the next person, William Sunday. So it says, my name is William Sunday, but you can call me Billy Sunday. I used to be a baseball player for you fans out there. I quit baseball to follow my new passion. I started preaching throughout Iowa and the rest of the Midwest and eventually went national. I preached temperance, personal salvation, and the middle class values. I converted thousands into the Christian faith. I started to make a lot of money, but donated much to different religious charities. I would later play a major role in the temperance movement leading to the 18th century prohibition, 18th Amendment prohibition. So do you think he was a social gospel part of the social gospel movement, or do you think he was a social Darwinist? Right. So William Sunday was a member of the social gospel movement, right? He was otherwise known as Billy Sunday. He was an evangelist, a Christian. He preached against the evils of drinking. As it said, he was once a baseball player, became a preacher, and he staged emotional meetings throughout the South during the early part of the 20th century. And these were called revivals, right? And so during the 1920s, social reformers associated with the social gospel movement, including Billy Sunday, they hoped to ban alcohol, and they actually managed to get the 18th Amendment to the US Constitution passed. And it banned the sale, manufacture, and transportation of alcohol. And it took effect in January of 1920. So this is actually a quote from Billy Sunday as he predicted a new age of religion and virtue after the passage of the amendment. So he said, the reign of tears are over. The slums will soon be only a memory. We will turn our prisons into factories and our jails into storehouses and corn cribs. Men will walk upright now. Women will smile and the children will laugh. Hell will be forever for rent. So clearly he was, as you can see, a member of the social gospel movement. Now we have Washington Gladden. It says, I am Washington Gladden. I oppose racial segregation and support unionization of workers. I believe that the church must be responsible for correcting social injustices in the political and economic order, including work conditions and unfair labor practices. I would obviously be a key member in the progressive movement, a movement encouraging reform. So do you think he was a member of the social gospel movement or the social Darwinist movement? Right, so he's a member of the social gospel movement, right? He was an American clergyman, and he was known as like a pioneer of the social gospel movement before the term even came into use. So he spoke up for workers and their right to organize unions. And for him, Christian law covered every relation, every aspect of life, including the relationship between employers and their employees, right? So he really called for a universal application of Christian values in everyday life. And he urged the church to minister to the needs of the working people, the poor, and those who are hurt by city life. So he urged support for labor unions to protect the working man. And he also identified with the settlement house movement. And he actually entered into politics to represent those seeking reform of city and local government. So the next person is H.G. Wells. And it says, my name is H.G. Wells. I'm an Englishman who has influenced American writers such as The Call of the Wild's Jack London. I have written in many books such as The Invisible Man, The Time Machine, and The Island of Dr. Moreau. In my book, Anticipations, I wrote, and for the rest, those swarms of black and brown and dirty white, yellow people who do not come into the new needs of efficiency, well, the world is a world, not a charitable institution, and I take it they will have to go. So again, it says, for the rest, those swarms of black and brown and dirty white, yellow people who do not come into the new needs of efficiency, The world is a world, not a charitable institution, and I take it they will have to go. So do you think he was a social member of the social gospel movement or a social Darwinist? Right, so clearly H.G. Wells is a social Darwinist, right? In his book, you can see aspects of social Darwinism in that excerpt, right? He takes the concept of social Darwinism to the extreme and he kind of imagines a future where different classes of society have basically become different, distinct species, right? Descended from the modern man, right? And he takes the concept that Darwinian evolution, natural selection, can act on social pressures, and he's basically saying that some groups, and in this excerpt, he's talking about different races of people that are destined to basically pass on, that they aren't going to exist much longer in his imagined universe, right? That they are too weak, according to him, and that the world doesn't really, as it says here, it's not a charitable institution. It doesn't owe them anything, and they'll just have to go. Now we have Dwight L. Moody. It says, I'm Dwight L. Moody. My father's early death forced me to find work at the tender age of 15. I am involved with the YMCA. More than 1,000 poor children attend my Sunday school in Chicago. I travel the country filling out stadiums with thousands of people and host conventions with such prominent evangelists as Ira Sankey. So who do you think, or what group do you think he was a part of? Social Darwinists or social gospel? Take your guess. Right, so he's a member of the social gospel movement. So during this time, there was a wave of urban revivalist preachers, just like some of the ones we discussed already. And the most renowned was this guy, Dwight L. Moody. And he was a shoe salesman who actually took he had a very skilled speaker, right? And he took it on the road with him. And he traveled from city to city, and he attracted crowds large enough to basically affect local traffic patterns. That's how many people were coming out to hear him speak, because he was such a great speaker. So who is this next one? We have Herbert Spencer. And it says, hello, my name is Herbert Spencer. I'm an English philosopher who has influenced many men around the world, including the United States. I'm known as the father of my theory, even though I never spoke of the term myself. I am often confused as being uncompassionate towards the poor. Just because I believe in the nature of man and believe in social evolution does not mean that I'm against the poor or women. So do you think that he was a social Darwinist or a member of the social gospel movement? Right, so Herbert Spencer was a social Darwinist, right? And he borrowed the popular concepts, including survival of the fittest, actually, Darwin borrowed it from him. So Herbert Spencer came up with this concept, survival of the fittest, and Darwin used it and incorporated it from him. And he really he incorporated it and published his theory on biological evolution and natural selection. And after he did that, Herbert Spencer, the guy you see here, he drew even more parallels between his theories and Darwin's scientific theories. So he applied the idea of survival of the fittest to laissez-faire or unrestrained capitalism during the Industrial Revolution. So basically, Spencer argued that businesses should be allowed to operate with little regulation from the government. And unlike Darwin, Spencer believed that people could genetically pass learned qualities such as morality and frugality onto their children. And Spencer opposed any laws that helped workers, the poor, and those he deemed genetically weak. He argued that those laws would go against the evolution of civilization by delaying the extinction of the quote-unquote unfit people, right? So clearly he's a social Darwinist. Now we have Jane Addams. It says, I am Jane Addams. I am known as an American reformer, social worker, and philosopher. My major accomplishment was helping immigrants assimilate in America with settlement houses such as Hull House in Chicago, Illinois. We provided social welfare to poor neighborhoods. Although I'm not known for my ideology, one had great influence over me. So do you think that social Darwinism had influence over her, or the social gospel movement? Right. So Jane Addams is a member of the social gospel movement. She was a peace activist. She was a leader of the settlement house movement. And she was one of the most distinguished of the first generation of college educated women, right? And she was inspired by English reformers who, these reformers, they would intentionally live with in lower class slums, right? And so she was inspired by this, and she, along with a college friend named Ellen Starr, they moved into an old mansion in 1899 in an immigrant neighborhood in Chicago. And basically, they leased the home of Charles Hull in Chicago. And the two moved in and they began the work of setting up the Hull House. And their mission was to provide a center for a higher civic and social life for the people living in the slum, and to institute and maintain educational and philanthropic enterprises. So their goal was to educate and to take care of and to help improve the conditions in the industrial districts of Chicago, where a lot of immigrants and poor people were living in these slums. And so she responded to the needs of this community. She established a nursery, a kindergarten, a playground, a gymnasium, right? And a cooperative housing for young working women to live in. And she found that the needs of the neighborhood couldn't be met really unless city and state laws were reformed. So she challenged both boss rule. So we've learned about political bosses, political machines. She challenged those political machines in the immigrant neighborhood where Hull House was located. And she challenged the indifference of the state legislature. And she was actually appointed to Chicago's Board of Education in 1905, and she helped to found the Chicago School of Civics and Philanthropy. And she became the first female president of the National Conference of Charities and Corrections. So she is well known for having sponsored legislation to abolish child labor, to limit the hours of working women, to recognize labor unions, make school attendance compulsory, and ensure safe working conditions in factories. And she remained Hull House remained Addams' home. She lived there for the rest of her life, and it became the center of an experiment, basically, in political action and research, and in helping. It really was a center to help a lot of people that were living in the slum of Chicago. So we're going to wrap up. What are the similarities and differences between these two ideologies? Compare and contrast? Tell me, what are the differences and similarities between social Darwinism and the social gospel movement? So take a second, think to yourself, look at your graphic organizer, and then I want you to respond to this question. Now I want you to review. I want you to do a reflective journal. We're going to review. What did you learn about? Tell me what you learned about. And make sure you're writing in complete sentences. So the first thing we learned was what? Then we learned what? Tell me. And, why is this important? Tell me why you think it's important. And what do you predict will happen in history next? What do you think is going to happen next? And tell me, what are some questions that you still have? So make sure that you complete this as well before going on to the next lesson. So let me know if you have any questions. Make sure to reach out, email me, contact me on Remind Me, or reach out during class. That way I can help you. So good luck on this assignment.